So, as we left off, I had kind of attracted to Sissy after I met her walking down the street, and I just gone home, but I couldn't stop thinking about her. So I'm in my house trying to work, and my mind's going around in circles thinking about this strange girl I just met. Got to get this picture right this time. By 8 o'clock that night, it was still hot as hell. I couldn't concentrate on my work, so I decided to walk over to Sissy's place. She only lived about a mile from me, so I needed to exercise anyway, so I thought I'd walk over there. I walked upstairs and knocked on the door. There was no reply. I knocked again. A moment later, a fat girl answered the door. She was eating what looked to be a ham sandwich, about half of which was hanging out of her mouth. "Is Sissy here?" I inquired. The fat girl stared at me as if she hated me. She took another bite of her sandwich. "It's for you," she yelled over her shoulder, still glaring at me. A moment later, Sissy came to the door. She looked completely different than she had earlier in the day. She'd changed into an orange summer dress, which outlined her lithe young body. Her blonde hair, which was all dirty and full of paint, like I described before, was now pulled back into a ponytail, and she'd obviously washed it because it was all clean and shiny. Man, I'm telling you, she did look terrific. Sissy seemed very happy to see me. "Oh, it's such a nice warm night," she said. "Let's go for a walk." Before I could do anything, she was bounding down the stairway. We walked along the side of the freeway and up over the hill, the one where, as a kid, I used to stand up and throw dirt clods at passing cars. Cops caught us one time. And then down to the Rocket Bowling Alley, which is right at the bottom of the hill. It was my teenage hangout. The sun was just beginning to set. And the crickets were already chirping. It was a magical time of day, even for ugly old Canoga Park. Every few moments I'd glance over at Sissy. She was truly beautiful. What's more, she constantly seemed to change, even as I looked at her. "Who is that girl who answered the door?" I asked. "Oh, that's Boom Boom. She's my sister. Well, half-sister, actually." "I don't think she liked me very much," I said. Boom Boom don't hardly like nobody," Sissy replied. "Don't take it personal or nothing." She smiled at me when she said this. She had a wonderful smile. And right then, just at that moment, I sort of thought I might be in love with her. It seemed pretty crazy, but what could I do? "So, how old are you, anyhow?" I asked her. Sissy didn't miss a beat. 15, she grinned. "But I can look lots older. Mostly I don't even get asked for my ID, she said proudly. After we'd walked for a while, Sissy and I went back to the bowling alley. Once we got inside, we bought Cokes and a bunch of candy bars out of the machine. We sat down at the table, eating the candy and drinking Cokes and watching all the bowlers. It was nice. Sissy lit up a smoke. So did I. I didn't actually smoke, but somehow just being around Sissy, I just kind of felt like doing it. Then she started talking. To tell you the honest-to-God's truth, I didn't really listen all that much to what she was saying. I just loved looking at her across the table from me. I loved the sound of her voice with its soft southern drawl. I thought she could say anything and I'd be able to listen to her forever. What I did hear of Sissy's conversation was fascinating. When she lived in Atlanta, she'd had this boyfriend named Mouse. He was a biker of some sort, I guess. Mouse used to hit Sissy a lot and beat her up. One time he even knocked out a couple of her teeth. "See," she said, and with that, she popped out her 2 front teeth. It was funny. Even without her teeth, Sissy was beautiful. But it wasn't so much her physical good looks, which were considerable, that had gotten to me, but rather this chameleon-like quality that she had. She seemed to be able to change almost at will. One moment she could look like a little girl. The next second her face would grow hard and cold like a woman twice her age. Oh, Sissy had been around the block a few times. I had no illusions about that. She told me that one time Mouse had made her sell her body when they couldn't get some rent money up. The first time she did it, she'd only been 11 years old. "You mean you were a prostitute when you were 11?" I exclaimed. That wasn't so bad, Sissy mused, munching on her Snickers bar. In fact, he was sort of fun. One time, I fucked Magic Johnson, she said. He had the biggest dick of any human being I've ever seen in my entire life. I must have given her a funny look. Ah, don't worry, Sissy grinned. I don't do with nobody now unless I really like 'em. Of course, I was already thinking along those lines, but I didn't want to go there. Later, Sissy told me about this one time when she and Mouse had been real down on their luck and Mouse had decided to rob a liquor store. Sissy didn't actually do any of the robbing herself, but she'd driven the getaway car. As she sat waiting outside the store, she'd heard a shot. Then Mouse had come running out. I don't know for sure, she said, but I think he might have killed the guy. He never would tell me, really, but I actually think he did. Then, the next second, her eyes went all foggy, and bingo, she became a little girl again. This is fun sitting here now, isn't it? She beamed. Yes, it is, I said. It really is. And inside, I could feel my heart go pitter-pat, pitter-pat. God, she was beautiful. I was really pretty crazy about her by this time. Hell, I didn't care if she'd robbed a million liquor stores. The next morning, Sissy came over to my place. We decided to walk up to the delicatessen in the shopping mall and have some breakfast. That day I was in a very black mood. My father is dying, I told him. He has cancer. The doctors say he only has 6 months to live. Sissy just looked over at me. Well, we all gonna die sometime, she said. I thought that was kind of a strange response, but I didn't tell her this. When we got in the deli, Sissy kept asking me nonstop questions about all the Jewish words on the menu. She seemed to be getting a big kick out of the fact that I was Jewish. You're my first one, she said, happily running her tongue over her large teeth. She seemed so happy that pretty soon I began to feel not quite so depressed. I watched her as she spread cream cheese on a bagel and slurped her orange juice. And then, while she munched her bagel, Sissy did something that I thought was absolutely wonderful. Underneath the table, she reached across and she put her hand in my crotch, right in the deli, in the middle of the deli and all. The next second, I had the biggest hard-on I've ever had in my entire life. Let's go to my place and fuck, she said. But what about your dad and Boom Boom, I asked. Daddy's down at welfare picking up his check and Boom Boom's at work, she said, squeezing my crotch harder. Come on, let's go. Well, all right, I said, trying to sound casual. We went to Sissy's apartment and we fucked. We fucked for hours and hours and hours. Sissy, for her part, was absolutely tireless. Long after I'd worn myself out, she still wanted more. In fact, she seemed to gather energy with each subsequent fuck, which I thought was rather nice. Still, there was no way in hell I could keep up with her. Finally, I lay on my back, staring up at the stucco ceiling. I was drenched in sweat. The apartment was 1,000,000 degrees because it had no air conditioner, but I didn't mind. Somehow it just added to the atmosphere. I imagined that Sissy and I were in Atlanta, or at least some southern town like that, and soon I fell into this Tennessee Williams-ish kind of fantasy. Sissy and I were Elizabeth Taylor and Paul Newman in Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. All we do all day is lie around in our underwear and all. We'd clink our iced teas and smoke cigarettes and blow the smoke out real smooth like they do in the movies. Outside the house, I could hear the low murmur of southern people talking on the front porch, and the sound of the black gardener sweeping up the leaves. Tsh, tsh, went his rake. Pretty soon, I just drifted off to sleep. I awoke later to find Sissy sucking greedily on my prick. She didn't notice that I'd woken up, so I just sat there and watched as she went about her business. Now, most girls look fairly stupid with a prick in their mouth, but not Sissy. On the contrary, she remained quite lovely. She really did. When she finally noticed that I'd awoken, Sissy let my prick slip out of her mouth. "Hello there," she said. "Hi," I answered. Then, just like a little kid with a new toy, she began to pretend my penis was a gearshift knob on an automobile. She went, shifting into second. Please don't shift my penis," I asked politely. Instantly, Sissy began to pout. Oh, she was such an actress, this one. But then she seemed to get a bright idea. You could see it on her face. The next second, she climbed on top of me and sat right down on my rigid cock. "I like to be on top," she said, bouncing up and down on my dick. "It's fun." Sissy looked down at her blonde cunt, which was dripping juices all over my crotch. This seemed to delight her. Everything seemed to delight her. "I like it when it gets all wet and sticky," she said, scooting up and down on top of me. Yeah, I replied. When we finished our lovemaking, Sissy said she wanted to go down to the thrifty drugstore to get an ice cream cone. They were only like 10 cents. This was fine with me. I really didn't care where the hell we went, to tell you the truth. Inside the drugstore, Sissy was like a little kid. She wanted to touch everything. She kept stopping to handle the perfumes, the greeting cards, the hairbrushes, the combs, just whatever she could get her hands on. She seemed particularly fascinated with all the different colored bottles of shampoo. As we walked through the store, I noticed that Sissy was wearing this really horrible old pair of tennis shoes that were just practically falling apart. So I told her she should pick out some new ones. "Really?" she said. "Are you sure?" She couldn't believe that anyone would want to buy her anything. "Go on," I said. "It's okay." Sissy looked and looked and looked around, finally deciding on a pair of those blue deck shoes. They only cost $3.50, so I told her to get another pair. But she said no, one was enough, thank you. For a girl that was basically poor white trash, she really had very good manners. When we got outside the drugstore, it was dark. We walked down a side street, past all the little houses with their lights on inside. Sometimes you could see people gathered around a TV set, or perhaps a man in a chair reading a novel. Everything seemed very still and peaceful, and for the moment, the world seemed like a good, safe place to be. I wondered what it would be like if Sissy and I got married. Would we be in one of those little houses, watching TV, or reading maybe? Would she come up behind me and put her hand on my shoulder, just lightly? Then, the next second, the other part of my brain jumped in and said, "What the hell are you talking about, man? This is just a kid. A goddamn 15-year-old kid, for God's sake. A 15-year-old ex-hooker who's robbed liquor stores and maybe even participated in a murder. Come on, man, wake up." But just as I thought this, Sissy took hold of my hand, and all my thoughts just went away, poof, just like that. So we walked along holding hands, not saying anything, just holding hands. She was a great hand holder. She didn't grasp too much or not enough. No, she did it just right. And her hand never got all sweaty either. Man, I'm telling you, she was really something. Well, the next day, Sissy and I drove up the coast highway to Santa Barbara. We stopped at this one beach in Ventura, where this long rock jetty ran out for several miles along the sand. Then we noticed something peculiar about the place. Inside the rocks that made up the jetty, there were all these cats. Hundreds of cats, maybe thousands. They were obviously feral. You could tell from the look of them they were totally wild. Most of them were really skinny, as if they hadn't been fed for a long time. It was really a very strange sight, seeing hundreds of cats climbing all over the rocks like that. Sissy, for her part, seemed very excited by all this. She went over to try to pick up one of the cats, but it arched its back and hissed at her. "Careful," I said, "they might have some kind of disease or something." But Sissy kept on running after the cats, climbing in and out of the rocks, talking to them, chasing them all over the place. She was like a little kid. She kept it up for the next couple of hours. Late that night, we drove back to L.A. along the coast. The lights on the ships out at the sea made the scene look like some magical fairyland. Sissy was very quiet during the ride. Ever since the cat, she'd been quiet. Finally, we got to my house. "So you want to come in and watch some TV?" I asked. Sissy just looked at me blankly. "I don't care," she said, real pouty-like. We went inside the house. Sissy plumped down on the couch and sulked silently while I watched a rerun of The Fugitive, because I've always been a huge fan of David Jansen, who happens to be buried right around the corner from my father. "Are you all right?" I asked after a while. But Sissy wouldn't even look at me. "What's wrong?" I finally asked. "What's bothering you?" "You people make me sick," she said finally. I looked at her. "What people?" I asked. "All you people. You're all exactly the goddamn same," she hissed. She was glaring at me now, and there was real hatred in her eyes, pure hatred. "And you're just like all the rest. You and your cancer and your death and your talk, talk, talk. God, is that all you ever do is talk? What the hell are you talking about? Now I was getting mad. Fuck you, Sissy yelled, jumping up off the couch. Fuck you to death. And with that, she stormed outside. About 5 minutes later, she came back in the house, and she was all friendly and sweet again. She came up and kissed me on the cheek, then she headed for the door. Got to get home and make sure Daddy's eating some dinner. He'd sit in front of that dang TV all day and not eat a thing, if I let him get away with it. I found Sissy's concern for her father to be quite admirable. Okay, I said. See you tomorrow. Bye, sweetie, she said, kissing me on the cheek before she left. Normally, I couldn't stand it if someone called me sweetie or honey. It just bugged the hell out of me. But when Sissy said it, it sounded wonderful. See, I told you. I had it bad. The next morning, I drove over to Sissy's house. When I got there, I ran up the stairs and knocked on the door. A moment later, her fat sister answered the door. Hi, Boom Boom, I said. Is Sissy here? Boom Boom still looked like she wanted to kill me. Sissy ain't here right now, she spat. Well, do you know when she'll be back, I asked. Come back later, Boom Boom said. Then she slammed the door in my face. When I got home, I tried to get some writing done, but nothing would come out. I simply couldn't stop thinking about Sissy. Every time I thought about her, my heart seemed to hurt. Man, it was awful. Finally, at around 4 o'clock, I just went back over to Sissy's place. Out front, Jason was sitting on the curb, watching cars and drooling all over himself. Hi, Jason, I said. Jason looked up. He said. Have you seen Sissy? I queried. Jason looked at me rather quizzically and then inserted a finger into his left nostril. He said, taking a good, healthy pick at his nose. I went back upstairs and knocked on Sissy's door, but this time nobody answered. So, finally, I got up and left. When I got home, it was around 5 p.m. This was the time of day I hated most. Nothing seemed to make any sense at this time of day. Everything was just kind of in limbo. Nothing was firm. This made me feel very weak and scared, and I always would start to get real depressed at this time of day. I don't know, it was part of my manic depression, I guess. But this day I had it really bad. I just felt like, I don't know, like I wanted to cry, but I couldn't. I knew this depression was coming on strong, and the doctor had told me when that happened I should do something physical like exercise, but I just didn't have the energy. It was like all the life had been sucked out of me, and I was just this dead thing, this blob. Finally, I decided the best thing to do would be to go to sleep. So I went and laid down on the couch. Soon I fell into a strange dream. In the dream, I was back at the cat beach, but only this time something was wrong there. The entire beach was littered with the bodies of dead cats. A few stray cats hobbled along, poking around amongst all their other dead brothers and sisters. They were obviously very sick, and they would soon die. In some of the rocks along the jetty, the mother cats were eating the bodies of their sick and dying babies. The hot sun glowed down on them. There was something horrible and ominous in the air, a kind of a sound or maybe even a demonic presence of some sort. It was not a good vibe at all. Whatever it was evil. I could feel it. I knew when evil was around, and it was around. I woke up in a sweat. I was covered with sweat. Before I knew what I was doing, I was driving like a madman over to Sissy's house. When I got there, I bounded up the stairs 2 at a time. My heart was beating a mile a minute. Knock, knock, knock. Nothing. Bang, bang, bang. A moment later, Sissy's father answered the door. He was still attired in the same dirty white undershirt he'd been wearing the first day I'd met him. He stood there blinking at me, unrecognizing. Is Sissy here? I asked. Her father just stood there, sort of weaving around. I said, is Sissy here? Nah, he finally said. Well, where is she? Sissy won't be back, her father said. You mean she won't be back today, or Sissy won't be back ever? But, I mean, she's gone, he repeated. Gone. The poor guy looked like he was about to start crying any second. I didn't know what to say, so I just turned around and walked back down the stairs. Behind me, I could hear something that sounded either like coughing or crying. I couldn't tell which. I didn't feel much like going home, so I walked back over the hill to the bowling alley. It was really crowded when I got there, so I went and sat at the same table where Sissy and I had sat a week ago. I just sat there letting the sounds of the clattering balls and the voices fill me up, trying to not feel so empty. There was something peculiar about the bowlers, but I couldn't figure it out what it was at first. Then all of a sudden it was clear. All the bowlers were deformed in one way or the other. There were paraplegics, hunchbacks, quadriplegics, guys with no arms and legs, cripples of every possible shape, size, and variety. I sat and watched the crippled bowlers. It wasn't funny. I didn't mean to laugh. They were having a grand old time, laughing and shouting, drinking beer, and being rowdy just like regular old people. I watched a guy with no arms wheel his chair down the lane and throw a ball with some contraption he'd rigged to his teeth. His buddies all cheered him on, laughing and snorting madly. It was really something. As I watched, I tried to feel sorry for the crippled bowlers, but I couldn't pull it off. After that didn't work, I tried to thank God that I had my health and all that, but I couldn't do that either. I was just so damn sad and lonely that I couldn't feel much of anything. After about an hour, I left the bowling alley and went back home. On the way, I went by Sissy's place once more. I was sort of hoping Jason might be out in front on the curb, sitting on the curb. I thought maybe I'd try to strike up a conversation with him or something. But when I got to the Jason's curb where he usually sat, it was empty. This made me feel worse than I already did. When I got home, I lay down on the couch and flipped on the TV with no sound. My face was all numb, and my mouth didn't seem to be working very well. I felt like I would like to start crying or something, but nothing would come out of me. There were strange little clicking and popping sounds in my brain. I did my best to ignore them. Finally, after a while, I fell into a dull gray sleep. About a month later, I was at home watching a cooking program on afternoon TV. Watching cooking programs is one of my favorite ways to pass the time. The only thing I don't like is if the person on the show sticks his arm up some old chicken's rectal cavity or something. Things like that can be fairly disgusting. Fortunately, this doesn't happen too often these days. Anyhow, I'm watching this cooking show when I heard the mail clank in the little slot. I went and got it. It was the usual shit, bills and stuff. Then I spied the postcard. I knew instantly who it was from. And sure enough, the postcard read, Atlanta, Georgia. The picture on the front of the card was a cartoon, one of those really corny old cartoons of a bum hitchhiking out in the middle of the desert. The caption underneath the picture read, I'll make it one of these days. I'd always loved those old postcards. They reminded me of long stretches of empty highway, little pink motels with green neon signs that shone in the night, and 10-cent bottles of Dr. Pepper, and ladies in flower print dresses. That kind of stuff, you know. On the back of the card was a note. It read simply, Thanks for the tennis shoes, and it was signed, Love, Sissy. I noticed the handwriting. It had these huge squiggly letters with very big, huge dots over the eyes. Totally teenage. I sat back down on the couch and thought about Sissy. I wondered what she was doing right now. I wondered if she'd gone back to Mouse, and to robbing liquor stores, and hustling her ass on the streets. I pictured her face, and I wondered if it would grow hard and bitter by the time she reached 20. I wondered if she still read Proust aloud. I even wondered who was making lunch for her father now that she was gone. I wondered all kinds of things, but I didn't get any answers. I looked at the postcard again. I held it under my nose to see if any of Sissy's smell had rubbed off on it, but it just smelled like an ordinary postcard. The cooking show ended, and another program came on. The show was called Body Buddies. It featured this not very in-shape couple doing a bunch of stupid exercises. The guy had this gigantic gold medallion hanging around his neck and this phony wig that made him look like Gorgeous George. And the woman had fat white arms that jiggled whenever she moved. It was almost impossible to look at them, so finally I flipped off the TV, and I just sat there staring at the empty screen. I watched the tiny speck of light in the middle of the screen grow smaller and smaller and smaller. Finally, it disappeared. I couldn't think of anything to do, so I didn't do anything.